Hello and welcome. My name is Natty Cash, and welcome back to episode 12 of our Ultimate March Madness Tournament. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's take a look at where we left off and what region we're going to be tackling today. From our last episode, we had Baylor moving on, our number one seed out of the California region. Next up, we have the Mid-Atlantic region, and we're going to see what teams are represented in that region, who will come and join the rest of these teams in our Sweet 16. And here we are at the top end of the Mid-Atlantic region bracket. Our number one seed that's going to be in this region is the Duke Blue Devils. They were second in the ACC, had a 27-9 record. 15-5 in the ACC. Unfortunately, they had lost early to NC State in the conference tournament. Let's see if they can do better in this format. They are awaiting a 16th seed matchup, which is going to be between the Canisius Golden Griffins, coming out of the Mid-Atlantic Conference, 14-18 record, 9th in their league. And they are playing the Portland State Vikings, a 17-15 record out of the Big Sky region, good enough for 6th in the Big Sky region. Then we go down to number 9, and we have the Trojans from the University of Troy. We've got a 20-12 record for them, 3rd in the Sun Belt region. Unfortunately, they also lost early against Texas State in their conference tournament. Let's see if they can bounce back, sitting in this 9 seed. They are awaiting their 8 seed matchup, which is the Red Hawks from Seattle University out of the WAC conference. 23-14 record, good enough for 4th in that region. As we continue down, we have our number 5 seed, which is the Sanford Bulldogs, a 29-6 record. That was good enough for 1st in the league going into the conference tournament, and they went all the way and won their conference. So conference champions out of the Southern Conference for Sanford. They're awaiting their 12 seed matchup, which would be either NJIT, the Highlanders out of the America East. They are 7-21 as a record, only good enough for 9th in their region, and they have a matchup against the Northern Kentucky Norse with an 18-15 record, good enough for 5th out of the Horizon Conference. Let's see what they can do to maybe push into that 12 seed position. Then we have another play-in at the 13 seed. We've got Eastern Illinois Panthers with a 14-18 record out of the Ohio Valley Conference, good enough for 7th in that conference, up against the Commodores from Vanderbilt University. A 9-23 record, so not a great record, but they are out of the SEC, so we'll see if they can push forward and be a part of this tournament. Whoever wins that game will have to go up against the number 4 seed, which is the Princeton Tigers, with a 24-5 record, coming in 1st out of the Ivy League. Unfortunately, they had lost early to Brown in their conference tournament, so they did not participate in the regular tournament. But let's see what they can do sitting in a strong 4 seed position. As we move to the bottom of the bracket, we are starting off with our 3 seed, which is the TCU Horned Frogs with a 21-13 record out of the Big 12, a strong conference. They were only 8th in that conference, but with a strong 3 seed, let's see what they can do with that. They are awaiting a matchup of the 14th seed, which will be between South Carolina State, coming out of the MEAC region with a 14-18 record, and the Mercer Bears coming out of the Southern Conference with a 16-17 record. We'll see what they can do there. Then we have our 11 seed matchup, which is the Cal Poly Mustangs out of the Big West, a 4-28 record. Not strong by Cal Poly, but maybe they can turn things around here. Up against Murray State out of the Missouri Valley Conference with a 12-20 record. That was good enough for 8th for them in that region. Whoever wins that matchup will have to face the number 6 seed, which is the Penn State Nittany Lions. 16-17 record out of the Big Ten. Only good for 11th in that region, but we'll see if Penn State can use something with that strong 6 seed position. Continuing down, we have our 7th seed, which will be occupied by Morehead State. The Eagles out of the Ohio Valley Conference had a 26-9 record. That was good enough for third in their league, but then they went on all the way, beating the number 1 and 2 teams in that conference to become conference champions out of the Ohio Valley Conference. So we'll see a 7 seed here. Maybe they can go far. Then they will play the number 10 seed, which will be either the IUPUI Jaguars of a 6-26 record out of the Horizon region, good enough for 10th in that region. They are up against the Wichita State Shockers with a 15-17 record out of the American region, only good enough for 12th in that region, but they did go far by beating Memphis in the conference tournament, ultimately losing out to UAB, who became the conference champion. So we'll see what they can do in this play-in for the 10th seed. Lastly, we've got the 15 seed play-in game, which will be between the Grambling State Tigers out of the SWAC region, a 21-15 record for them. And not only that, they went all the way and became conference champions in the SWAC region. So another conference champion in this side of the bracket, up against Maine with a 15-17 record out of the America East, good enough for 6th in that region. Whoever wins, though, will have to play the number 2 seed, which is the Flyers from Dayton University, a 25-8 record, good enough for 3rd in the Atlantic 10, but they lost out early to Duquesne in their conference tournament. Let's see if they can bounce back and make a run in this tournament. So here we see the entire bracket of the Mid-Atlantic region. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on who you might think might move forward, and we're going to go through one at a time and see who is going to be our champion out of the Mid-Atlantic region. So as we zoom into the top end of the bracket, our first matchup is going to be the Canisius Golden Griffins up against the Portland State Vikings. And it is the Golden Griffins from Canisius College that get the victory here. Although this was a very close matchup, back and forth, Canisius did have a lead of about 6 points, but many lead changes in the second half. But it is Canisius College that get the win here to move on to the next round. So as we can see, the Golden Griffins have moved on. They will be playing the Duke Blue Devils in their next matchup. Further down, we have our next play-in game, which is the NJIT Highlanders up against the Northern Kentucky Norse. And we do see it as the Norse from Northern Kentucky that get the victory here. They take a lead early on, but they then build on that all the way to the final here, a pretty substantial win in the end to move on. And there we see the Northern Kentucky Norse moving on. They will have to play Samford in their next matchup. Our last play-in the top half of our bracket is the Eastern Illinois Panthers up against the Commodores from Vanderbilt. And we do see the Commodores getting the victory here. Even though it was close early on, Vanderbilt built a lead, and a fairly significant one at halftime, and never looked back, going towards a dominating 40-point victory. And so we can see the Commodores have moved in to represent that 13th position, and they will have to play Princeton in their next matchup. And as we go to the bottom half of the bracket, we will then move on to see the South Carolina State Bulldogs up against the Mercer Bears. And we do see the Bears from Mercer getting a significant win here. They took the lead early on, never looked back, all the way to a fairly dominant victory in the end. So we can see the Bears moving on, representing our 14 seed, and they'll have to play the TCU Horned Frogs in their next matchup. Further down, we have the Mustangs from Cal Poly up against the Murray State Racers. And we had a very close matchup here, coming right down to the wire. Even though Murray State was winning near the entire time, Cal Poly had a good defensive stop here and actually tied the game before Murray State got 1 point, maybe a made free throw to get the win here. So Murray State is moving forward, although A very tight matchup here. So it is Murray State that fill in that 11th seed and will have to play Penn State in their next matchup. As we continue down, we have the Jaguars from IUPUI playing the Wichita State Shockers for that 10th seed position. And it is Wichita State that get the victory here. They took the lead early on and never looked back to a relatively comfortable victory in the end. And Wichita State does move forward into that 10th seed position. We'll have to play Morehead State in their next matchup. And then we have our 15th seed, which will either be filled by Grambling State Tigers or the Black Bears from Maine University. And it is Grambling State that get the victory here. Looks like they were leading nearly the entire time, but it was a low-scoring affair. So even a lead here was about by 11, but it was closer towards the end for Grambling State to get the 8-point victory. And so here we have it with Grambling moving on. We have our 16 teams that will represent the Mid-Atlantic region. Starting from the top, we're going to see the Duke Blue Devils go up against Canisius College. And it is Duke that wins, but not by much. Canisius gave them a very good run for their money. And you see, Duke was leading most of the way, but Canisius held strong. And even though there was a lead made in the second half, Canisius pulled to within 1 point towards the end before Duke finished off with a 5-point victory. And so Duke do move forward, even though in a tight game, and they'll have to wait their first matchup, which will be between the Troy Trojans and the Seattle Redhawks. And we do have the Seattle Redhawks getting the victory here. They took a lead partway into the first half and built a big lead and never really looked back on the way to their first win in this tournament. And Seattle has moved forward into a regional quarterfinal against Duke. Further down, we have the Samford Bulldogs up against the Norse from Northern Kentucky. And with our first upset of this region, it is the Norse with a victory here. Samford had a small lead for most of the first half and was basically tied at halftime, but it is Northern Kentucky that pushed forward and get the lead. Even though Samford did well to try to get back into it, they were just 1 point short and could not get the win. So it is the Norse that are moving on in this matchup. So with our first upset on the board of Northern Kentucky moving on, let's see if there are any others that pop up. Starting with looking at if the Vanderbilt Commodores are able to win against the Princeton Tigers, or will the Tigers be able to hold their own in that 4th seed position. And it is the Tigers from Princeton that get the victory here, and fairly convincing as they take the lead early on and maintain a reasonable lead all the way to a fairly comfortable victory in the end. And so it is Princeton that moves on into the quarterfinals of this region. As we now move to the bottom half of the bracket, we're going to have the TCU Horned Frogs up against the Bears from Mercer. And this was another close game, but it is TCU that get the victory here. Mercer were actually leading for most of the game. At halftime, they're up by about 5 points. But TCU held in and then was able to push to get the lead in the second half and walk away with a close victory in their first matchup. And so TCU does move on, awaiting their next matchup will be between either Murray State Racers or the Nittany Lions from Penn State. And we do have the Nittany Lions getting the victory here. They took a strong lead early on and never really looked back, going on to a relatively comfortable victory in the end. So we do have Penn State moving on into the regional quarterfinals. Next up, we have our number 7 seed Morehead State. The Eagles are facing off against the Shockers from Wichita State. And it is Wichita State that get the victory. A bit of an upset here, as we did have Morehead State winning for most of the first half, but it was about tied in the first half. Then Wichita State took a lead and never looked back all the way to actually a relatively comfortable victory, a 15-point victory. And so with Wichita State moving forward, they will be awaiting their next matchup, which will be either the Tigers from Grambling State or the Dayton Flyers. And we do see the Flyers getting the victory here, although it was a tough battle at first. Grambling State was winning for most of the game, and the first half they were still Dayton was still losing by 3, but eventually a big surge in scoring for Dayton allowed them to take a big lead and maintain that all the way to their first win of this tournament. And with that, we have our regional quarterfinals set, with Dayton moving on to play Wichita State. We will start again from the top with the Duke Blue Devils up against the number 8 seed, the Red Hawks from Seattle. So it is the Blue Devils that get the victory here, although it was relatively close. Many lead changes back and forth throughout the first half, with Duke having maybe a 2-point lead at halftime. Then Duke started to pull away a little bit, but really it was only a 9-point victory in the end for Duke to move forward. So it is Duke that moves on into our regional semifinals. They'll be awaiting their opponent, which will be either the Norse of Northern Kentucky, one of our surprise teams, up against the Princeton Tigers. And as you can see, it is Princeton that take care of business here. Even though Northern Kentucky had a lead for a short amount of time in the first half, Princeton led the entire way and got a 19-point victory in the end. And with Princeton moving on, we have one of our semifinals set. Our second semifinal, we will then determine, which will start with the TCU Horned Frogs up against the Nittany Lions from Penn State. And it is the Horned Frogs that get the victory here. They led for near the entire game, built their lead up, and had a comfortable 21-point victory in the end. With TCU moving on, they are awaiting their next opponent, which will be either the Wichita State Shockers or the Dayton Flyers. And it is the Dayton Flyers that get the victory here. They were leading nearly the entire time. Well, actually, nearly the entire time. Although Wichita State had a good push and brought it to within 2, they couldn't really push over that hump, and Dayton again extended their lead to get a comfortable victory in the end. And so it is our top 4 teams in this region that have gotten on to the regional semifinals. Any one of these teams could come out of this region. Let's see what is made of our finals, starting up with the Duke Blue Devils taking on the Princeton Tigers. And it is the Blue Devils that take care of business, never really looking back in the end, leading nearly the entire time, all the way to a very commanding victory to move on to our regional finals. And with Duke moving on, we are awaiting their next opponent, which will be either the TCU Horned Frogs or the Dayton Flyers. And in a close matchup, it is the Dayton Flyers that get the victory here. They were leading the entire time. However, TCU kept it close nearly the entire time, never really getting them too far beyond a 10-point deficit, but they could never really close the gap as they lose out and Dayton moves on to our regional finals. And so we have Dayton moving into the regional finals. This is now the 5th region that we've seen where the number 1 and number 2 seeds make it to the final. In our previous 4, the number 1 seed has won twice, and the number 2 seed has won twice. So this could be anyone's game here. Duke and Dayton, let's see who is our Mid-Atlantic region champion. And it is the Dayton Flyers that have the victory here. Look at this game back and forth throughout. You had Duke winning early on, Dayton taking the lead. Probably about halftime, Dayton might have a 5-point lead. Then in the second half, a big surge by Duke to then get the lead again. Many lead changes. And then Duke was winning potentially by about 5 points. But a last surge by Dayton's offense and good defensive play allowed Dayton to get the 4-point victory and be our Mid-Atlantic region champions. So Dayton are our champions out of the Mid-Atlantic region, becoming the 5th number 2 seed to make it to the Sweet 16. congratulations to them for making it this far. Thank you so much for watching, as that's where we're going to leave it off for today. If you want to continue to follow this series, please like and subscribe below. And we are then going to jump into the Appalachian region in our next video. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.